right, thank you guys for being here. Now, let me make sure I have this right. You're a Republican and you're a Democrat.
I'm sure our opponents would accuse us of being the opposite. That's right.
And you guys have been working together for a long time on what always used to be a hot-button issue that deeply divided Democrats and Republicans, the whole question of sentencing reform and criminal justice. How did this happen? And by the way, you're not just any Republican. You tend to be a little to the right in the, I mean, I don't know if there's anybody further to the right in the Senate. There might be a couple further to the left in the Senate, but not many. How did you guys end up working together on this?
Well, first of all, I just want to correct you. The rush to increase mandatory minimums was a bipartisan rush.
Yeah.
Remember
Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton's 1994 crime bill. Even the Congressional Black Caucus was on board with a lot of the changes that drove up our federal incarceration rate 800%. And so it's understand this is something that's happened because we were all participating in it, with obvious exceptions. And then in terms of Senator Lee, to say that we were working together, it diminishes him and elevates me in the sense that Senator Lee was working on this issue far before I came into the Senate. And he came about it with a bona fides that not many senators have. He was a prosecutor and got to witness many of these cases. So he brought an authenticity and understanding to this that was extraordinary. So by the time I joined the Senate almost 2 years ago at the end of this month, some of my earliest conversations were with him to really join that emerging group in the Senate to try to push for what we announced today extraordinarily, which was a comprehensive criminal justice bill, some of the core pillars of which he's been advocating for years.
But I'm going even before Clinton. I mean, Republicans for years would run against Democrats by saying soft on crime. I mean, look at the 88 presidential race, Dukakis Bush, and here you come out, Senator Lee, and you say maybe we've swung a little bit too far in the other direction.
Yeah, what we see is that we can be tough on crime by being smart on crime. It's not always the answer to just ratchet up the sentences.
One strike, you're out, or is it two strikes, you're out, maybe one strike and you're out? I mean,
that's not always the best way to fight crime. And it comes at a tremendous cost. A lot of Republicans approach this from the standpoint of looking at the financial costs of incarcerating that many people. I look at it more from the human cost. We've got a whole lot of people, a lot of husbands and fathers and uncles and nephews and brothers who are locked up sometimes for decades at a time, a lot longer than they need to be. And
for nonviolent crimes.
Yes, for nonviolent crimes. And I, as Cory said, came at this as a former federal prosecutor. I witnessed a case handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Utah, where I worked, where there was a young man named Weldon Angelos in his mid-20s. He was a father of 2 young children. He made some mistakes. He sold marijuana on 3 occasions over a 72-hour period. He had a firearm on his person. The way the federal sentencing laws worked produced a 55-year minimum mandatory sentence.
Wow.
Mr. Angelos will be in prison until he's 80 without some kind of meaningful reform. I remember when that case was handled, the sentencing judge, U.S. District Judge Paul Cassell, actually issued an opinion saying, "This is awful. I feel like a monster having to impose this sentence. And yet the law ties my hands. Congress is the only thing that can change it."
You can't.
Exactly. There's no reason why we should lock him up till he's 80.
Okay, but I want to take a step back to you two. Okay, I mean, we are living through this era where political the divide is as deep as it has ever been. The anger, we even heard some of it in here when I was trying to, was talking to Kathy McMorris Rogers. The two sides don't seem to even want to tolerate listening to what the. I mean, we had a member of Congress boycott the Pope's speech because he disagreed with the Pope on climate change. How? What do you guys do when you hang out, and what do your colleagues say about this?
It's actually, that part of it is actually quite easy, and that part of it actually occurs a lot more commonly than people think. Now, it's true, the parties disagree on a lot of issues, but there are a lot of other issues where we don't. Now, I see this as one of many issues in which we can attack problems that we agree upon as Republicans and Democrats. This is a problem with an available solution that's neither conservative nor liberal, it's neither Republican nor Democratic. It's simply an American issue, and it comes very naturally to people like me and like Senator Booker, who are concerned about this issue and just want to make it better.
Well, why does it almost never happen then, Senator Booker?
Well, first of all, so I'm new to the Senate, and my experience as a mayor which is you just have to fix things. There's no Republican or
You
Democratic
were buddies with Chris Christie. I guess you have been
There's
doing
no
this,
Republican or Democratic way to fix a pothole, is the old saying.
Yeah.
And for me, the urgencies as being a big city mayor every day made me, I don't care what your party is. If your house is on fire, you don't stop and ask the firefighter if they're Republican or Democrat. And we had so many urgencies that I was just like, the governor of my state's a Republican. The biggest city in the state needs to have a partnership with them. And he and I talked about, okay, let's just separate the 95% of the things we may disagree with. Let's find the 5 things we may agree with and work really hard in those areas. And as a result of that, Newark is going through now its biggest economic development boom since the 1960s and has a lot of, first time its population is growing in 60 years. And so when I got to the Senate, I knew that the strategy had to be that I was going to the Senate to do the only thing you can do to get things done, which is work with people on the other side. I'm sorry, the Senate will never move forward in a Democratic way or a Republican way. There has to be a compromise. And so from the get-go, out of the blocks, I would say the overwhelming majority of the legislation I sponsored, for my first piece of legislation with Tim Scott about workforce apprenticeships. Other countries are leaving us behind in preparing their workforce for the actual jobs that exist, to the criminal justice work I've done with Mike Lee. I'm trying to find those areas where there is bipartisan support so we can move the ball forward in those areas.
You've been very critical of the Republican leadership. You've been independent force in the Senate. What is your sense on the Democratic leadership? Do you think that you look back at Harry Reid's leadership of the Senate, did he not do enough to try to find some common ground with the Republicans?
Look, you know, I'm really not one of those guys that wants to get stuck casting stones. And I'll give you the best example of this. Here's for stone casting, all right. You know, Chairman Grassley is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. My biggest issue in many ways when I come to the Senate, after I saw the destructive impact of this criminal justice system on a city like Newark that is over 80% minority. We have a criminal justice system that's so biased. 2 dramatically different justice systems are experienced by the wealthy and privileged than are experienced by the poor. In fact, you get treated better if you're wealthy and guilty than if you're poor and innocent at times. And so I came to get something accomplished. Now, Chuck Grassley, when I came in, was giving speeches on the Senate floor that I radically disagreed with. His leadership, I felt, was a block to reform. And I could have started out by just getting on the Senate floor and attacking him. But instead, I sat with him and began conversations with him and worked over a period of time to a point where we are today, which we were all praising each other in a press conference we just came from. And so maybe I need to get to this point, but these party shenanigans of this leadership is doing this leadership's not doing that, I'm trying to work below all that noise because I don't think it's productive and say, hey, we know as a country, I'm a Democrat, but we know the debt issues in our country are going to be severe if we don't start dealing with things like Social Security, if we don't start dealing with things like the medical expenses for this country, where we're paying much more than our competitor nations and having less good health outcomes. And so I just poke around trying to find where are the people I can exist. Like, take a senator like Flake, for example. One of my first votes against something that the president signed was the Farm Bill. I don't understand how we as a country are subsidizing the very things that are making us sick. I don't understand that. And right. I found allies on the Republican side who were like, let's stop the corporate welfare for big ag industry and figure out ways to start working on these problems. So to me, that is a way to get done. I know we're in a town that loves to sit back. I always say democracy is not a spectator sport, but this town seems to think often it is, where they can just sit in there eating their popcorns, rooting for red or blue, and breaking down the process of it all. This has got to become a place where we let the politics go and get back to the governing, because our nation, in our generation, we're about the same age. This is what distresses me, and we both are passionate about it. America used to be #1 on indices that mattered. Top nation in the globe for percentage of population graduating from college, the best infrastructure on earth, the most R&D investment. I can go through all the World Economic Forum, OECD keeps all these indices of the competitiveness of an economy. And if you look at their rankings, we've fallen in everything. And one of the things they tag us for no longer being the most competitive place, is a dysfunctional political system that can't get even the most obvious things done at times. And so the question is, in life, you have a choice to make every single moment of your existence, to accept things as they are or take responsibility for changing them. And I'm proud to find colleagues with me that are more interested in taking responsibility and trying to be the change they want in the Senate. And that's why I've become such a fan of Senator Lee, who I disagree with on a lot of things, but we found some common grounds, and today is a result of that.
But can you find common ground? Can you find common ground on those tougher issues? I mean, you know, you guys fundamentally agree on this issue of criminal justice reform, but you get to something like Social Security, spending priorities. I mean, there are a lot of lines in the sand that are drawn on both sides. On your side, it's, you know, we'll never agree to any revenue increases. You know, Obamacare must be repealed. Absolutely not a dime for Planned Parenthood. How do you find common ground on those big issues, the fundamental ones?
We're not always going to agree on all of the big issues, but experiences like this one and working on criminal justice reform can be kind of a confidence-building exercise for us, where we were able to come together, and notwithstanding the fact that there was a lot of overlapping agreement between Republicans and Democrats, we didn't always have exactly the same priorities. But we were able to identify some common priorities, and depending on which level of abstraction you start at, you can always find some common principle. The well-being of the American people, or something much more specific, like let's reform this particular minimum mandatory penalty. Mm-hmm. I think there is always potential for agreement.
So let's try to get to one really tough one, just to pick, and we could pick many. Guantanamo Bay. President desperately wants to see Guantanamo Bay shut down before the end of his term. Where are you on that? Because one issue I've heard raised is, as you have fewer and fewer detainees at Guantanamo Bay, the cost begins to become overwhelming. Is there possible common ground on moving beyond Guantanamo Bay? It's not going to be there forever, is it?
I don't know. I can't imagine that it would be, but it's difficult to say. Look, if we were to move in that direction, I'd want to know what the alternative is, what the solution is, where those prisoners who are there now would go. If I heard a reasonable proposal, I'd be happy to consider it.
So you're not completely adamantly opposed to the idea of shutting down that?
Well, I wouldn't call the existence of Guantanamo Bay sort of prime directive from which I can't depart. It's not an article of faith. It's not something that's written into the Constitution that we have to adhere to. That said,
hearing some people talk about it, you might get the sense it is.
Well, yes. Perhaps it is for some. It's not necessarily for me. But that said, I'd want to know what the plan is.
What's your sense on this?
My sense is that I've traveled the state of New Jersey more than most New Jerseyans, up and down, north and south. I've met with the wealthiest suburbs, the poorest inner cities. I've met with Orthodox Jews, Baha'is, Jains. I'm telling you, I have never heard anybody from my state talk to me about Guantanamo. And so I have strong beliefs, but you know what? I have heard people talk to me about Social Security. That's a tough problem. I've had people talk to me about a tax system that incentivizes people to move things offshore. And so what I scan the horizon for is things that matter to my state. Now, I'm not saying this doesn't matter and that I don't have strong feelings on it. I'm just saying that in the limited time, the most valuable resource a human being has, not the money they have in the bank, it's the time they're given every single day. And so for me, I'm constantly scanning the horizon to deal with things of monumental importance. There's a negotiation or discussions I'm working with Republicans and Democrats right now on something that I never thought I'd be interested in. I'm from Jersey, not Texas, but that's oil exports. Controversial issue, right? But I also have passionate belief that if we stay on the current trajectory we're on right now, even with Obama's controversial energy plan, we will still only have by 2030 about 20% renewables in our country. Now, if we are able to renew the production tax credit and the investment tax credit, we could actually get to 40% or more renewable in our total package of what's fueling our energy grid. Now, in a city that has, I live in Newark, in a city that has 4 times the asthma rate of I'm writing a book right now about a kid that died from asthma, that has the particulate matter in the air is costing so much to our productivity, to our children's benefits at school, missing school days, doctor visits. This is a really important issue for me. And so is there a common ground? This is now being openly talked about by saying, hey, maybe we can allow oil exports if we can find a way to give business what they need, which we don't do in Congress very well, and I think Mike would agree with me, which is giving businesses reliable expectations for what the tax picture is going to look like for a while. Social Security, controversial issue, right? But you know what? There's only 4 or 5 dials you can turn on Social Security. We just did a bill where you and I actually might agree more than our chairman, Chuck Grassley, and some others, but there's only a certain number of dials. Do you reduce mandatory minimums from 10 years to 5 years? Only a certain number of dials. So that makes for a discussion. Now, I might enter the Social Security discussion with my number one issue about Social Security might be that there's still about roughly 5 million American seniors living below the poverty line. So I might come into that discussion saying, that's what I want to deal with the problem on.
You want more.
Well, I know what the dials are.
Yeah.
And when I hear even people like Chris Christie saying things like, well, should we means test this? Yeah. Should somebody that is Donald Trump or Michael Bloomberg be collecting Social Security? These are dials that we can turn. So I'm not going to negotiate that right now in the Aspen Ideas Festival if you guys...
Come on.
But I'm simply going to say...
Why isn't that discussion happening? I mean, John Boehner tried to have that discussion.
But who says it's not happening? I met with a group of Democrats the other day to have, not the other day, this has now been weeks, but to have a conversation about, hey, can we open a dialogue? So there are a lot of people in the Senate that I know what captures the headlines. I know what people want to write about. But there are a lot of my colleagues that I've come to have profound respect because they're not there to waste their time or make really good speeches that go nowhere. They're looking to solve urgent problems. I've only been in the Senate 2 years, and people ask me, what was your experience? You were a mayor. I was a mayor that I could look up and see a vacant lot and say, we're going to build a park there, and in a matter of months build parks. They said, it must be horrible to go to the United States Senate. And I said, wait a minute, time out. Actually, it's been a really good experience because
really?
in a short 2 years, we've been able to get real substantive things done. Look, Roger Wicker, for example, is somebody, we have states that are very similar, of course, obviously.
Yeah, of course, Mississippi and Jersey.
Yeah, it's very two peas in a pod.
Yeah.
But
you and Roger Wicker are
yes,
different hair.
Exactly.
Boss hog accent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we came together in a way that the House didn't, and over passenger rail, and got a compromise on a pretty good bill that will fund positive train control, which is important, which will get more resources to an area of the country that is the busiest in rail transportation travel, the Northeast Corridor, that was a good compromise and that moved the ball forward. It made no headlines.
Now, this is a shockingly optimistic discussion. I'm a little concerned. All right, we're almost out of time, but I've got the two of you here. I've got to do a little 2016 presidential politics.
We will not run on the same ticket together. This is not an announcement.
This would be a very interesting ticket.
But if we did, it would be Lee Booker.
So let's start with you. You've got I've lost count. I think it's at least 3 of your colleagues running for president in the Senate.
Actually, I'm currently the only Republican senator not running for president.
Yes, okay.
That's why they got me here today.
What's going to happen? First of all, let me ask you the question we asked earlier. Is there any chance Donald Trump's your nominee?
Look, who knows? He's doing really well in the polls right now. It is an understatement to say that he is an unconventional Republican candidate. Yeah. I do think that you're going to start to see some surging by some of the other candidates. I think Rubio has begun a surge. Some have suggested that, and I think it's reasonable to suggest that you might see Senator Cruz also making a surge. It's really difficult to predict at this point, though, because we've never had this many candidates from the outside who have taken off quite like these guys have.
Totally
quite like
outside.
Trump and Fiorina and Carson all at the same time.
So you've got a kind of a Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker relationship with Ted Cruz, and I forget which one
am
of you. I forget if you were Darth Vader, I guess, right? Because you helped him get elected when nobody thought he had a chance in Texas. So no offense, but what's your sense on him? It's been fascinating to watch he and Rand Paul now really go at it. And Rand Paul said yesterday that Ted Cruz is done, he's finished, can't accomplish anything in the Senate because he's ruined all his relationships. You're friends with both these guys.
I am.
I think he was Han Solo. I forget how. So how does that play out?
I think I'm an Ewok, first of all.
The three you get together.
Look, a friend of mine recently said trying to discern every decision made by a presidential candidate is like trying to smell the number 7. And so sometimes presidential candidates behave in unpredictable ways. One of the reasons why I've stayed out of any endorsement of any presidential candidate is that I've got several friends running at the same time. I want to help be the referee between them and make sure they don't beat each other up.
And could you see yourself supporting Donald Trump as a Republican presidential nominee?
Look, I see myself supporting whoever is the eventual nominee.
Even if it's Donald Trump?
We'll see.
Okay, you're not getting out of this either.
I was very happy to be a spectator.
But, okay.
Democracy is a spectator sport.
I saw somebody float a while back the idea of a Biden-Booker ticket.
When you say Biden-Booker ticket, is that like he and I will go to the movies together? Because I definitely think that that's a possibility.
Now, but you're tight with Biden. Is he going to run?
I am not tight with Biden where he calls me up to consult with me about his presidential intentions. I do not know if Biden will run or not. I do not know who may also jump into the race. I've come out and supporting Hillary Clinton, and I'm looking forward to working on her campaign.
So would you prefer it if Biden did not run as a Hillary?
No, I think actually it helps the democratic process for there to be vibrant debates and discussions of the issues. So I actually think it's great that my colleague Bernie Sanders is in the race because he's bringing up very important ideas, viewpoints, and in the Senate he's been one of my more trusted allies on a lot of issues. So I don't think this is a bad thing to have a lot of people in the Republican and the Democratic side. I think that this is one of the more vibrant elections we've seen, and more people are paying attention. I'm grateful for Trump, not just because it's made my watching of late night TV much more fun, but seriously, I think he's been additive in terms of awakening more people to the process. When you get 20+ million people watching a presidential debate, that cannot be bad for a democracy. King said it so eloquently. We have challenges, we have problems. He said, but what we will have to repent for in our generation is not the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but the silence and indifference of the good people. Our nation's biggest problem is not the engagement of folks, it's the lack of engagement of folks. And I celebrate a political process that gets more people in the game.
All right, great point. And Senator Lee, Senator Booker, thank you.